we learned about this American hero that fought in 3 wars, just was a stellar aviator, an example for all of us to follow, and we all wanted to be a guy like Brigadier General Charles McGee. And Charles has been with us on many events. And Charles, you're up on the screen, looking good. We're gonna go through your life, and you're really looking good there, sir, in Bethesda. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to be here and share with you indeed.
Oh, thank you. And we'll go into it right away. We have a few pictures there. So Joe, if you'll bring up the first slide. But when we, as we lead up to World War II, I wanted to cover a little bit of your background prior to that. You were the son of a Episcopal Methodist minister,
Yep.
an educator, and he was a teacher and everything. You had education just stamped on you from day one.
Well, it was important for the family and also fraternity. I was active in go to high school, go to college. So the family was all focused on that phase of education, realizing how important it is. And so it was a good opportunity as I grew up.
Well, Charles, and you had an opportunity. You were born in Cleveland, but you ended up being able to move to Illinois. You're at the University of Illinois in Champaign as an engineering student, and but you had to work your way into that. And during the Great Depression, you were working in some of the federal programs and doing everything to get by. Can you tell us how you made it to be an engineering student?
Yes, after I graduated from high school, of course, going to college, you go to a state school, it was much cheaper. Going out of state would have been more money than I had. I worked a year with the Civilian Conservation Corps and got enough money for my first year of college, although working, I couldn't pay for all of it, but it allowed me to get started. And that work got me interested in engineering, and that's why as I started my college year, it was in the engineering program.
Well, you were in school, and it's December 7th, 1941. It's your 22nd birthday. You were born on December 7th. And can you tell us what it was like? How did you get the news, and what were you doing when all of a sudden you heard about the attack at Pearl Harbor?
Very interesting. It turns out because of my birthday and Christmas coming, we had a break in studies, and my dad was in Gary, Indiana at the time, so I was home, but I was with the Coleridge Taylor Glee Club. I always enjoyed singing, and we were motoring from Gary, Indiana to South Chicago for an evening program at a church. And after 4, over the radio came the news of the attack. Of course, that shook us a bit, but we went on with our program. We didn't let that, because we, of course, had no idea what that would mean for the country and for all individuals.
So now President Roosevelt, the next day, addresses Congress. We're now at war with both Japan and Germany, and you're still a student up there. And now fast forward to April of 1942. You're walking on campus, and you pass a young lady named Frances. Can you tell us what happened next?
Yeah, we were between classes. I was walking south on the university campus, and she was walking north. And after we passed, I paused a minute, turned around and looked, and she had stopped, paused, turned around and looked. So I need to follow up on that, and I did. We were able to get acquainted, find out she was in Champaign, was her home, so she was in school, but from home, and our churches weren't far apart, so it didn't take us long to get together, and that grew. So eventually we came closer together, and I can tell you about that because it turned out to be a wonderful thing for me. I had passed the pilot exams when I learned about the Black Aviation Program, and that was in like the same time frame that we had met. But weeks and months passed and nothing happened, and finally in October we determined to get married. We got married on a Saturday, and lo and behold, Monday morning's mail having me report as a cadet directly into pilot training, which at that time was at Tuskegee, Alabama, because of segregation.
So now you're en route from Tuskegee, recently married. I understand Francis went with you down there to Tuskegee. And Joe, you want to pull up the next slide, and you got to jump right into your training in both the Stearman and the Texan. Can you talk about what it was like to be going through one of those initial classes down at Tuskegee?
Okay, I have a few words I'd like to say because getting into that PT-17 in primary training, I was hooked. So I had never been in an airplane, and I wasn't one of those that was there because I had a ride or lived near an airport and said, I'd like to do that someday. But it struck me in a way that lasted more than a lifetime, if you will. But it was something. We were with Tuskegee Institute that had the contract for the primary phase of pilot training, and they built an airfield about 7 miles from Tuskegee Institute. So after our primary training, we moved to the airport, Tuskegee Army Airfield, where we had contact. And it's interesting, the Army was allowed to contract the primary phase of their training to civilian pilot training school. Tuskegee Institute had an excellent civilian pilot training program, although the Army policy was that we wouldn't be successful and couldn't do something technical like maintain and fly aircraft. My instructor was a black pilot because of that contract. So we didn't get contact with the white Army, experienced Army officers until we left Tuskegee Institute, moved to the airfield for basic and advanced training, and check out in the P-40.
Joe, if you can pull up the next slide. So you graduate, I think it was graduation class 43F, and there you are in the front row.
Yes.
You're looking like a steely-eyed, ready to go to work type of aviator. What was it like to be able to graduate, and did they tell you at that time where you were going and you know what you'd be flying and what theater of operations you would go into?
They didn't tell us, but the picture was pretty clear. The first squadron, the 99th Pursuit Squadron, checked out, combat ready in the P-40, sent to North Africa, attached to white groups, but the segregation went overseas. They weren't at the same base. They sent a pilot over to get their briefings. Colonel Momeyer didn't want them, and after a time he said, I told you they weren't aggressive. They've only shot down one aircraft, should be patrolling Liberia. Well, how's your memory of the African continent? Where's Liberia? Where were the Germans? Where were they stationed? I think you understand. But the hearing here in Washington found that the 99th bombs on target was the same as the other squadrons, and their performance was equal. Stayed in combat. So they stayed moving out of Africa into Sicily, out of Sicily into Italy, attached to white groups. In the meantime, three squadrons followed, the 100th, the 301st, and 302nd Squadron. Upon graduation from training, we were immediately assigned to the group. Tuskegee Army Airfield was too small, and our training took place in Michigan, not far from Detroit. And the 332nd Fighter Group was combat ready in the P-40, and you say, oh, you are going to do some patrol work. We're switching to the P-39. So we still left training in December of 43, getting into Europe. At the same time, the 99th was moving out of Sicily into Italy. The 332nd Fighter Group arrived, and we patrolled Naples Harbor and the waterways up to the Anzio beachhead. It turns out that the 99th, and I say it was a one bit of integration because Colonel Bates, the group that they were assigned to, was glad to have more pilots and more aircraft. And the 99th, in their work over the Anzio beachhead, shot down a great number, more than a dozen German aircraft. So it was a matter of opportunity. But in the spring of 44, 15th Air Force decided they needed to pull some of the aircraft doing the interdiction and ground support work and provide escort of our B-17s and B-24s. We thought we had enough guns on our bombers and to protect them from the German Air Force, and it wasn't the case. Bomber down, that's probably 10 American lives lost if it was destroyed. So four groups were pulled from 12th Air Force to move to 15th Air Force, the Adriatic side of Italy, and begin escorting. We gave our P-39 to the Russians and picked up P-47 Thunderbolt, which we only had about 3 months, and then we got the P-51 Mustang about 44. The Mustang.
That's where I want to stop you, Charles, for a second. So, Joe, if you go to the next slide. So in that very short period of time after graduation, next slide, you actually go from the Warhawk to the Airacobra, then to the Thunderbolt, but then they give you the Mustang. So next slide there, Joe. So obviously we've all heard of the famous Red Tails, but your Mustang in particular had a very special name on it. Can you talk about your nose art on your Mustang?
Yes, that nose art seemed to be popular, and a lot of folks had pictures of their girlfriends and so on. And I chose, since I was married, I chose to put my wife's nickname on, which was Kitten. But I said it's very fitting because my crew chief was also keeping that engine purring like a kitten. So it worked both ways for me. And that picture that you showed was my crew chief, Nate Wilson. So we were glad to share. And we owe so much to the mechanics that, of course, we didn't have hangars and the type of facilities today. I mean, then as we have today, and we owe a great to the mechanics who in all kinds of weather changed engines, did all of the work that was needed to allow us to do a good job.
And in the Mustang, you had a very momentous day shooting down a Focke-Wulf 190. Was that your most memorable mission in Europe, or were there others that really stand out in your mind?
Well, there are others stand out. The escorts long range to the oil fields that the bombers were destroying, which put the German Air Force out of service practically. But I also remember that the partisans in Yugoslavia saved the lives of a lot of both British, American, and other pilots. That planes were down, but they were kept them out of hands of Germans, and it was very classified at the time. But it turns out our group was assigned to escort some plans to go in airfield space cleared to repatriate those grounded crewmen that the partisans in Yugoslavia kept out of German hands. They didn't know because of classification then, but to realize that both in air and for those that had suffered, we were part of helping getting them back home.
So in late 1944, You've now completed 136 combat missions, and they send you back stateside, and you get into the B-25 Mitchell. So, what was it like to be back home training airmen while the war was completing about another 6 months in Europe?
Yes, as I say, I love flying. It's interesting that although I was combat trained, experienced fighter pilot, uh, the training for the Mitchell B-25 had started. In fact, when I graduated, my instructor, flight instructor, said, "I wish they had a pilot program for you guys because I think you'd make a good bomber pilot." I didn't ask him what he meant, but he didn't know, nor did I, that they had already approved training for the Mitchell B-25, which started about 3 months after I had gone overseas. But coming home as a fighter pilot to be assigned as a twin engine instructor, again, what it was about flying that struck me the way it did. I was just glad to fly whatever. So I even checked out in the P-47 so I could go pick up supplies or take people to schools. What anything that was flying, I was ready and available. But to be one of the instructors for the 477th Bomb Group early pilots was great, added to my experience tremendously.
Well, okay, so now the war concludes, and it's 1947. Next slide, Joe. And the President Truman, signs the act to create a new department, just like we saw last or the year before with the creation of the Space Force. We created the United States Air Force. What was it like for you to trade in your olive drab for Air Force Blue?
Well, it was very interesting because although the war ended in 45, the Army never changed their policy. The belief that we couldn't perform and they didn't recognize what we had accomplished and done. There were those in the Air Force, I'm not sure everybody was for integration at the time, but looked at what we had accomplished and what it had meant to aviation. And they said, we need to change. We need to integrate and use people where needed and based on their training. And it was a few months after the Air Force made that determination that the president issued Executive Order 9981 indicating all of the units should integrate. The Air Force and the Navy, the Army and Navy were a little slow, but in the Korean time frame, they really got on board. But the Air Force led the country into providing equal access and equal opportunity by closing the segregated base, which at that time was south of Columbus, Ohio. 46, when training ended, those of us at Tuskegee were there in Ohio, but we were July 1st, 49, we were scattered around the world based on the Air Force movement.
Well, so now it's the late 1940s, and it's the dawn of the jet age. And Joe, if you go to the next slide, I understand the first jet that you got your hands on was the F-80 Shooting Star. Can you talk about what it was like to transition from pistons to jets?
Yes, I had been sent over to the Philippines, and 2 weeks later is when the Korean War broke out. I grabbed 51 pilots. We were all flew in Korea, but when my 100 missions ended, I said I'd like to go back to the Philippines and join the overseas tour. The 44th Fighter Bomber, well, the group had changed just before the war broke out from the P-51 to the F-80. They gave the P-51s to the Korean Air Force. But coming home, I had been promoted to major. I became the commander of the 44th Fighter Squadron there in the Philippines. But I had a little checkout, and the pilot that checked me out came back and looked at work and said, "I've got to give you 2 more rides before I can clear you because you hadn't flown the F-80 before." I was loving it. and kids ask about it. But at that time, the thrust of the engine was not that high. You could hold the aircraft on the ground with your brakes at 100%, but to be able to sit there, go to 100%, fire still burning, let go of the brakes, and a couple minutes, 3 minutes later, be up at 20,000 feet was another great thrill in flying experience. And I can say right now, in those steps, I was lucky enough to actively fly 27 of my 30 years of aviation service. And I'm a happy camper.
So as you said, so now you're in F-80s, and all of a sudden the Korean War all of a sudden breaks out, and they have a rapid call up for people with P-51. Now it's called the F-51 experience, and you told me that they had a bunch of Mustangs stored up in Japan. So what was it like now to jump rapidly into your second war?
Well, it was very interesting because they thought the two squadrons going up to Japan from the Philippines could get some of the 51s back from the Philippine Air Force and get a checkout. Uh, they checked and they weren't satisfied with the way they were being maintained. So my last ride in November 44 in Europe in 51, and in 1950, I'm going down the runway in a loaded P-51 in Japan. A little shaky, I'm pretty sure, but it didn't take long. But we picked up aircraft and flew missions out of Japan while the first strip was built inside the Busan perimeter in Korea.
And Charles, how were those missions? You know, you were doing a lot of escort and air-to-air missions in World War II. How are those missions different now in Korea in the F-51?
Yeah. Well, as I look back, I say that my experience covered phases of what I call the Air Force or the aviation experience, military experience. World War II, the task that we had was I call air superiority. In other words, would keep any German fighters from penetrating the bomber stream and destroying bombers. So air superiority. Korea, interdiction and ground support. In the 44th Fighter Bomber Squadron, I never saw a MiG because they weren't down in the trees and there where we were working. And of course, we weren't allowed to go over the Yalu River. So although I flew 100 missions, never saw their aircraft. It was later in the war and others that came in a different phase that allowed it to be able to see or fight against one of the Chinese aircraft. So 100 missions, but interdiction and ground support.
So you wrap up Korea, and now you're at a two-war total of 236 missions. And Joe, if you'll advance two more slides, I'm gonna jump forward for time now to Vietnam.
Okay.
So you got now we've got the F-4 Phantom, and you start your training in the Phantom, and you're a lieutenant colonel. Can you talk about now how you went into becoming a recce pilot and what it was like now to be back into your third war as you deployed over to Tan Son Nhut in South Vietnam?
It was a very interesting part of the Air Force history. They determined they needed tactical intelligence there, and two new squadrons, the 12th and 67th, were formed. The pilots and the crewmen all went to recce school in Virginia, went out to Mountain Home, Idaho to get checked out in the aircraft. Two of us were lieutenant colonels, and I say I was made commander of the 67th and took them to name once slipped me for a minute here. Took them into Thailand. The other lieutenant colonel took the 12th squadron I went to Vietnam and he went to Thailand. That's the way it was. So that mission, again, was an interest of the experience. tactical intelligence. We carried no weapons. Our only defense was speed, but it was 24-hour a day, day and night operation, all types of equipment. Quite an experience. And we had to use that speed on a number of times to stay safe. But again, because of promotion to command the squadron, but also fly the missions. That picture that you show was the fire truck shower and the champagne shower that I got on my last mission in Vietnam.
And that last mission, and I think about it, having had the honor of being a squadron commander, 173 more missions in Vietnam that you rack up. And so, when you total all of those missions up in 3 wars, 409, no one in the history of the United States of America has ever racked up that many missions in 3 wars. That's just truly phenomenal.
Well, you have to add fighter, because there are some pilots that have flown more missions, but they weren't in all fighters. They flew, bombers and other support aircraft. So add the word fighter, right, and we can say that.
I'll get in trouble with my bomber friends if I say anything else on that area, Charles. But also, while you were there in Vietnam, your son was flying out of Thailand in F-4s as well. Ronald was flying, right? Who now flies for Boeing, training pilots all over the world in the 777, right?
Yes, indeed. That was a happenstance that doesn't take place. That I don't think it's. There have been others where a father and son were flying the same type of aircraft in the same part of the world at the same time. I'm sure there may be some other instances that can be recorded, but that was a part of my flying experience in the family. And of course, I ended up my career with total flying of a little over 6,000 hours. But when you look at the commercial and the type of flying my son did, and he was in the service for about 7 years, but he's a retiree with over 30,000 hours. But we both loved flying, and I didn't pass it on to him because when he was little, he was making airplanes, but he would make one, go up and crash it so he could go get another one and build it. So aviation is part of our life's experience.
Well, and you retire in 73, but you continue on. And Joe, if you go to the next slide, we had the honor of being with you the day before your 100th birthday, a couple years ago up at Frederick, Maryland. And my good friend Boney is in the right seat, and we watched you taxi out. And he told me when you came back and you taxied it in on that beautiful Cirrus Vision jet that he never touched the stick or anything, that you did a phenomenal job. And what was it like to be commanding and flying a jet on your 100th birthday?
Well, to be able to be where technology has taken us in the corporate jet was again just a marvelous experience. And I look back, and that's why I say, to me, life has been a blessing, because I still don't know why and how I have been selected so many times to do something I enjoyed doing, and the opportunity to in my lifetime, and to be able to fly that airplane at that age and share with others the experience. Wow. And just more than I can say. I don't know why and how I deserve it, but I'm certainly a happy camper and glad to share the experience. That's why I like to talk to young people too, because they're our country's future, and hopefully they're as interested in their talent, have talents that interest them as much as being able to fly, both in the military and some commercial that I did after service. Wow. Glad to.
Well, wow is right. I mean, the next day you got to fly, and Mark Baker had you in the M2, and he also said you wouldn't let him touch the stick. And then if you go to the next slide, Joe, a few months later, or very short time later, you're out there flipping the coin toss for the Super Bowl game between the Chiefs and the 49ers, and those boys look pretty big compared to you. And then another slide, then about a month later, you're in the White House and you have your star pinned on. So I started calling you sir, and then you're up at the State of the Union, and I got goosebumps when you were up there, and everybody, you can see on the picture on the left, you got such a tremendous standing ovation to represent all of us so well, and we are so proud of you, Charles. And then one more slide, Joe, if we look at just what you've done with being able to inspire young people to go into aerospace. And I remember this young man talking about you and reading his essay at your party about what you meant to him and to all of us. It's just, you're a national treasure, Charles, and at 102, we all wish we were blessed so much with your health, and we want to have you around for your 110th birthday, and all of us want to fly with you. It's we just can't thank you enough for what you've done for freedom and this nation. And unfortunately, we have to wrap up for time, but I want to give you the last word before we say our farewells to you.
It's just been, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to share. And the key to me is our mentoring and motivating the young people who are our country's future. We wish everyone the best, and certainly the best to the field of aviation. And of course, we can add space to that as we look at both aviation, transportation, and all. Thank you so much. The very best, and I wish everyone stay safe.
Thank you so much.